Okay. All right. Well, I've gotten the honor to introduce the next speaker, and I guess many of you know Oliver Hart, who was one of the receiver of Sveriges Riksbanks prize in honor of Alfred Nobel 2016, together with Erik Holmström. For me, I have some, on a personal note, I actually, both as a researcher and as a teacher, are very grateful to you, Oliver. As a researcher, my second paper I ever wrote was about computational complexity of verifying contracts. And there I actually cite a paper by you and Erik Holmström from 1987. And that allowed me to motivate that study. So thanks for that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have that publication, I guess. Nevertheless, but also as a teacher, I come from microeconomics, and I teach at many different levels. And when you teach microeconomics at the advanced level, you want to have a part of contract theory. And what you normally do is to explain contracts, how they should be optimally designed, where you balance risk and incentives. And that can be done in different smart ways. But then there is often some smart students that ask, but what should we do if we don't have any signals about behavior? Or if it's very difficult to write a contract. And that is a deep question that involves, I would say, institutional theory from Ronald Coase to another Oliver, namely Oliver Williamson, if you know him. What then is what the problem is there is that they have very deep thoughts about this, but there was no formalized theory. And when you as a teacher try to communicate with students, it's very handy to have a theory that organized thinking in a structured way. And Oliver Hart has been a major contributor to this way, to this development of more formalized theory. So I'm very grateful for that too. And now I'm looking forward to learn a lot about citizen investors.
Thank you. Thank you for those words. It's a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak here. I thank Victor for inviting me and also letting me talk about my current work. I was a little worried that it didn't have much to do with the rest of the conference, but actually I do see some connections. There were, I think, you'll see connections to what Margaret and Henry were talking about, and also a little to what Elder was talking about earlier in one or two places. So let me jump in. Let me say this is, my work in this area is all joint with Luigi Zingales, and part of it that I'm talking about today also with Elaine Landemore. I don't know whether you know her, she's a political scientist at Yale, who has a book coming out any day, or maybe today it came out, I don't know, called Politics Without Politicians. About 60% of Americans invest in the stock market, many through their pensions, and libraries are filled with books on how to manage your money, and it's easy to get financial advice, and indeed Elder was, I think, referring to the kind of advice that is available for some people. But I'm not aware of any book that tells ordinary investors that their shares come with votes and that this gives them some power and also perhaps some responsibility to influence what companies do. And just as one piece of evidence for that, I was talking to Brett at lunch, and she said she didn't know about the votes. So this is great, what I'm saying. Most people in the US invest not directly, but through intermediaries, mutual funds, and in the US, we have three very big ones. They call the big three: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And many people invest through them. And I'm sure people in this room do. And these mutual funds, okay, so they're the intermediaries. So we're not holding shares directly in companies. And they vote in board elections and on shareholder proposals on our behalf. And many of us aren't aware that any of this is going on. So one question is, how has this situation arisen? Why are we all so ignorant about all this voting stuff? And I think the answer is that, or at least one answer, is that according to the conventional wisdom, investors want the highest financial return possible. And the best people to achieve this are experts, the best people to elect, to decide who the appropriate board members are, who will choose the appropriate CEOs. They are professionals, they're experts, like mutual fund managers. So it's just fine for them to be voting and engaging on our behalf. So where does this conventional wisdom come from? No one has had a bigger role than Milton Friedman. In an incredibly influential 1970 New York Times article, he wrote, and I will quote this: "In a free enterprise private property system, a corporate executive is an employee of the owners of the business. He has direct responsibility to his employers. That responsibility is to conduct the business in accordance with their desires, which generally will be to make as much money as possible while conforming to the basic rules of the society, both those embodied in law and those embodied in ethical custom." Now, Friedman recognized that shareholders are people, the ultimate shareholders of companies, the people who invest in mutual funds. They are people, and they're not only interested in money. He understood they have social goals, but he argued that they could achieve these best by themselves. They don't need companies to do it for them. At the time Friedman wrote, a big issue was whether corporations should give to charity. And Friedman's argument was that they should not. He said, it's better for a company to pay a higher dividend, and then each shareholder can decide what fraction of that extra dividend to give to their favorite charity, rather than having the CEO of the company make the decision for them. In this example, I think he's very persuasive. To use economic jargon, companies do not have a comparative advantage relative to shareholders in giving to charity, so they should stay out of this. Now, Luigi and I, in several papers and in our forthcoming book, Citizens Investors, you'll have to wait for it though, I think it'll be sometime next year, we argue that charitable contributions are a very special case. Companies do not have a comparative advantage relative to shareholders in giving to charity, but they do in other activities, and then Friedman's argument breaks down. So let me give you a very simple example. Suppose you own a dry cleaning business. You can make more money by dumping a side product, a hazardous chemical, in the local river. Let's suppose this is not illegal, but you know that people living downstream will suffer. Do you do it? Some people may answer yes, but many will say no. Now, in contrast to the charity case, the dry cleaner does have a comparative advantage in avoiding pollution. It's much more efficient for the dry cleaner not to dump than to dump and then to have the owner or owners clean up. I mean, first of all, if there are many owners, there's a coordination problem. But even if there's only one owner, the cost of cleaning up could far exceed any profit made from dumping the stuff in the first place. The implication of this is that a socially responsible owner might decide not to dump the chemicals, even though this does not maximize profit, which basically violates Friedman's proposition. Now, Luigi and I have argued, and we have several publications already on this, but they're articles. The book is obviously going to try to take this message to a broader audience. We've argued that companies should maximize shareholder welfare rather than profit shareholder value. So Friedman talked about profit, but these days people tend to talk about shareholder value. It just means really the share price. And we're saying no, the right objective is shareholder welfare. Now, shareholder welfare includes profit, but it also takes account of shareholders' moral preferences, how much they're willing to accept a lower financial return for the greater good. So in my example, the dry cleaner, perhaps they'll say, yes, we could make more money by dumping, but we don't think that's the right thing to do, so we're going to give up some. That kind of trade-off. Shareholder welfare incorporates that. Now, notice that in a sense, we're being quite conservative because we're not departing from shareholder primacy. Okay, some people say, oh, we have to take account of all the stakeholders and so on. Our view is a more limited one. Yes, take account of the stakeholders, but only if the shareholders want that. Why the narrow perspective? Because we're not trying to overturn corporate governance practices. I mean, most companies are set up with the shareholders having the votes, and we are going to respect that decision of the founder. We're not going to interfere with that. We're just saying, yes, companies should act on behalf of shareholders because that's the way they're set up, but shareholder goals may be more complicated than just maximizing profit. Let me take another example. ExxonMobil has worked to undermine environmental policies to combat global warming. It has also, in the past, it has financed organizations that cast doubt on climate change. This may be very profitable. In fact, I think arguably it has been very profitable for Exxon, but is it what Exxon shareholders want? Well, I think probably many of the people in this room are Exxon shareholders. Maybe not directly, but through a mutual fund. If you have an S&P 500 index fund, Exxon's in it, so you will have a small bit of Exxon. I certainly do. Okay, is Exxon acting in our interest? Is this what we want? Well, I don't know about you. It's not what I want. Sure, I want, and I guess we all want to be a bit richer, but we care about other things too. We don't want to live in a hotter world, or for our children or grandchildren to live in a hotter, inhospitable world. We may even care about people unrelated to us living in such a world. In other words, we're somewhat altruistic, as that's certainly been a theme of today. And I think it's right. Exxon's actions are subverting these goals. Exxon claims to be acting on behalf of its shareholders, but it doesn't ask its shareholders what they want. It could and it should. The mutual funds through which we invest claim to be acting on our behalf when they vote and engage with companies, because they assume we want to maximize financial return. But as I say, I don't think that's true with Exxon, that that's the only thing we want. But these mutual funds don't ask us what we want. They also could and they should. But how? So now we go to the second part of the talk. Okay, I have a slide on pass-through voting, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip it. We could come back to it if there are questions, but I want to jump straight into our proposed solution to how companies and mutual funds can find out what their beneficiaries, what their investors want, what kind of trade-offs they're willing to make. So this is the work together, both with Luigi and Hélène Landemore, who, as I say, is an expert on citizens' assemblies. So what we propose is an investor assembly, and it's inspired by the idea of a citizens' assembly, or citizens' assemblies generally, which have been used in the political context. And I'm supposing that many of you already know about citizens' assemblies, but in case you don't, what are they? They're relatively large bodies of individuals, 100, 150, that sort of number, chosen at random, technically through stratified random sampling, from the larger population to deliberate on important social and political issues. They were popular in ancient Greece over 2,000 years ago, went out of fashion, but are now having a comeback. So think of large juries aimed to capture the full diversity of a population and ideally offer an accurate demographic mini portrait of it. An important difference from juries is that participation is voluntary, so people have to be tempted to do it, and I'll say a few more words about that in a minute. Citizens' assemblies have been used in Ireland. They were very successful there. They proposed new abortion and same-sex marriage laws after politicians couldn't solve those problems. And the proposal of the assemblies went to a countrywide referendum and were approved. In the case of France, there's been a citizens' assembly on climate justice, which led to some proposals which went through the legislature, in other words, were approved. Not all of them, but some of them. And there was also one more recently on end-of-life issues that Hélène was actually involved in sort of running it. That one is still hasn't been acted on by the French. It was actually Macron who, I think in both cases, liked the idea of these assemblies and so was behind both of the ones in France. But, you know, life became difficult for him, so he didn't have somehow, I guess, the bandwidth to act on the second one, yet anyway. But there are many other examples of them. So what we propose is applying this idea to the investor context. And we think it makes sense, at least in the first instance, to do it at the intermediary level. Not, I mean, you could also do it at the Exxon level, right? Each company, the level of each company. But since a number of the issues apply to lots of companies, and you know, through an intermediary, you're investing in all of them, then as I say, I think it makes sense, certainly, to do it at the intermediary level. So let's take, you know, I said there were the big three. One of them's Vanguard. So let's pick on Vanguard. Vanguard, our idea is they would randomly choose 100 or 150 of the investors in their S&P 500 index fund to be members of the assembly. As I said, it's not mandatory to be part of this, so you have to be induced to be part. How? Well, you're going to get some compensation for time. You're going to get expenses, including daycare, so that younger people, women, mothers, might be attracted to do it. Now, before the lottery, so there's this sortition. Before that takes place, we're going to allow each people to opt out. So, you know, there's some people who might say, I don't want to be part of this. They're going to be deciding on voting policy. I want to do my own voting policy. My own voting. I want to do my own voting. This is actually pass-through voting, which I alluded to in this slide, which I then went past. But so we're certainly allowing for that. People are not forced to be part of this in any way. Okay, so opt-out is possible. Now, no, wait a minute, sorry, that's going the wrong way. Sorry. You're seeing the whole thing, it's terrible. Yes, so we're there, right? Okay, so one of the things that is different in the investor context from the political context is, I think in the political context, we're all happy with one person, one vote. So everybody should have an equal probability of being selected for this, as you know, the abortion assembly in Ireland, say. Although, as I say, it's stratified so that, you know, you get the right mix of older people or younger people, men, women, and the like. But still, basically one person, one vote. And now, of course, in the investment context, we're familiar with something different: one share, one vote, or $1, one vote. So, you know, as a nod to that, what we suggest is a sort of a compromise that someone with a greater investment in the S&P 500 fund will have a higher probability of being selected. Someone who's got a huge amount in it, which I don't think there are too many people like that, can opt out, probably will opt out and say, I'm going to do my own thing. But anyway, so higher probability if you have more money invested. But once in the assembly, so you're one of the 150 people, everyone has one vote. Okay, I think anybody who's had any experience with these assemblies would say, oh, it would be terrible, for Victor to have 10 votes and Oliver to have one vote, in the assembly. So we're not going to do that. Okay, members of the assembly will be provided with informational resources, briefing materials, and access to experts. So this is very important. They're going to be able to listen to people. And in fact, the idea is they're going to take charge of the process. And this is also what happens with citizens' assemblies. They decide who they want to hear from. It's not something that Vanguard is going to control. They will meet online, so we can take advantage of modern technology. They'll meet online, but they're also going to meet in person. I think the idea is they would meet in person for at least 2 weekends, both at the beginning and at the end. And right, they're going to deliberate and they're going to make recommendations to Vanguard about its voting and engagement strategy going forward. So let's take some examples. The first investor assembly could recommend that the fund should support resolutions, shareholder resolutions that call on companies to obtain shareholder approval for lobbying campaigns. Later investment assemblies can deliberate on voting guidelines in response to the specific lobbying campaigns that have emerged from the previous recommendation. So what we're trying to get at here is go back to Exxon, which lobbies against climate regulation. Well, some of Exxon's lobbying may actually make sense. I mean, not all climate regulation is great, but some of it probably is a very good idea. And so we don't want them, so we have to fine tune a bit. Some lobbying okay, some lobbying not okay. An investor assembly would therefore have to decide between the two, and that's going to affect Vanguard's strategy going forward. Another example, the assembly could consider whether Vanguard should support a shareholder proposal to end the use of antibiotics in large-scale poultry farming. Right, this reduces costs, but contributes to the development of antibiotic resistance and puts human lives at risk. Or as a third example, and this I think is a little related to what Elder was talking about, because you were talking about all these ads that people get, and food companies, this is sort of, it's part of, getting people addicted. Food companies produce products designed to be addictive. The assembly could consider whether Vanguard should push these companies to change the ingredients, or put warning signs on the packets. Obviously, that's less radical, but changing the ingredients, maybe Coke should have less sugar in Coca-Cola. These are just some examples. Now, one of the main criticisms of citizens' assemblies, and likely of investor assemblies, is that randomly drawn people don't have the expertise to make competent decisions, right? But investor assemblies will not be asked to calculate the optimal hedging strategy against interest rate risk, right? Instead, they're going to be asked if they're willing to accept, to take my antibiotic example, a lower financial return in return for having less risk of antibiotic resistance. And to make that, decision, they're going to hear experts on both sides. So financial experts can tell them on the cost to the company of doing this, or companies. Medical specialists can talk about the social benefits from having less resistance to antibiotics. The final trade-off is a moral decision, right? It's dollar costs here against social benefits measured in dollars, we'll assume there. Currently, such decisions are made by company boards or asset managers, as I was saying, without us even knowing that this is going on. But these people were not picked for that job. They're not professionals on moral trade-offs. Who are the right people to make these decisions? We argue it's the shareholders who also, I mean, they suffer the economic consequences of the decisions. If costs are going to go up, it's coming out of their pocket. But, you know, if they're moral people, they may think it's worth it. And the assembly is a way to find out. Okay, some people may look at this and say, well, it sounds great in principle, or maybe you're saying, no, it's a terrible idea. But let's be optimistic and you like the idea, but you might be thinking it could never work. Well, yes, it can work because it has worked. In early 2024, Emmeline Cooper and Rob Bauer organized an investor assembly for a Dutch pension fund to discuss responsible investments. I think part of the mandate there was also, so this was a pension fund, it had beneficiaries, it was persuaded, or it already thought that maybe it should consult its beneficiaries about what it should be doing, how it should be engaging in companies, but also what it should be investing in. So I think that was part of the mandate. The three of us, Luigi, Ellen, and I, are a little less enthusiastic about that part of it because we think that picking investments, deciding, oh, this company is a bad company and therefore we shouldn't invest in it, is not really a very smart strategy because you're not going to influence the company that way, right? There are plenty of other investors. If you don't invest in that company, there are many other people who will. So the share price is not, they're not going to notice whether you invest or not. And what you're doing is you're giving up all the power you have through votes. And you're going to be replaced, you know, if you sell your shares in oil companies, the people who buy your shares, as I say, for A, the share price won't change, and B, they're probably less moral or, you know, yes, less morally concerned, less pro-social than you are. And so the voting is going to go in the wrong direction. So it's better to stick with bad companies and try to make them better rather than exit or divest. That's our basic philosophy. And let me just say one other thing along those lines, which is most companies are neither angels or devils. They're somewhere in between. They do some good things, they do some bad things. So, you know, it would be crazy to, you can't divest from them all because they're not perfect. Then you would be in government bonds. Come to think of it, that's not a perfect entity either. Anyway, so I think the right strategy is to invest in a lot of things, but try to make them better. Okay, a little bit of a digression that. But anyway, this, so in this pension fund, what it did, the pension fund got only 50 investors, randomly chosen, and brought to the, of course, the Netherlands, small country, they were brought to the city of Utrecht for 3 different days, during which they approved 49 proposals for responsible investment to submit to the board. And many of these proposals, the pension fund has adopted. The role, as I say, many of them, not all of them. So the role of the Dutch Assembly was advisory, and we think it is prudent to start with an advisory role. So we're imagining something like that as well. Maybe over time, if it all works very well, you could actually make it binding, but not for the moment. Now, Emmeline is also now working with a large pension fund in the UK to do the same thing, much larger pension fund. So this seems to be very definitely possible. Okay, let me wrap up. It's late in the day and you've heard a lot of stuff already from others, but let me sort of summarize. Companies do many good things for society. So we don't take the view that companies are evil. You know, we're economists, we think they're useful, but they cause major problems too. Now, economists usually take the view that preventing the bad things is the job of governments. So this is sort of another thing underlying the conventional wisdom. Sure, there are externalities that companies create, but don't worry about that. Government will regulate them or have a Pigouvian tax or something like that. And once that's in place, then the companies just can go ahead and maximize profit. That is the standard view in economics. But it's wrong. It's wrong, not least, I mean, I can give more than one reason why it's wrong, but let me just pick one, which is that in the name of profit maximization, companies actually prevent government doing what it should be doing. And we saw that Exxon's a great example of that, where they lobby against sensible climate regulation. So, and that's of course just one out of many examples. So, you know, profit maximization really isn't a great idea if the companies are, as I say, preventing government solving the externality problem. And who can deal with that? We're arguing it has to be the shareholders. Those are the people who can actually say to the company, stop doing this, stop interfering with what government should be doing. I think I actually don't have to go through that. So we think that shareholders' voices need to be heard, and investor assemblies are a feasible way and a pretty good way for that to happen, a practical way for it to happen. I should say that, yes, my last bullet point says giving investors a voice can curb corporate excess and lead to a better world. Well, that's a hope. We don't know. I mean, I don't know how this investor assembly would vote, or would you know, what kind of recommendations they would come up with. Maybe, you know, they'll say about Exxon, just keep drilling, we don't care about climate change, we don't care about anybody else, we're old, we just want to be rich. And so, yes, please prevent any decent climate regulation ever happening. They might say that, which would be very disappointing to me. But, you know, democracy, essentially, this is all about how we think shareholder democracy is just a good thing in itself. And just like political democracy, you know, the election doesn't always turn out the way you want. And so it could happen here. But I think we also think, and there's quite a lot of evidence actually, which I haven't had time to go through, but which is very important, where people have asked people, and also some of whom are shareholders, you know, are you willing to give up some money for something? And the answer is yes. So there's every reason to think that one of these investor assemblies might actually end up recommending some policies that I think many people in this room would approve of. Let me stop there. Thanks. Yes.
So I'm very, I mean, I of course embrace the idea and I like it. I'm very curious to know whether you've given some thought about whether the deliberation should target specific companies or the sector. Like in this case, Exxon or like other oil companies as well, because of course there are competition
absolutely.
there. And I'm glad you regulate Exxon. But
no, absolutely. No, that's an important point. And I think, I just said Exxon, but Chevron no doubt does the same thing. It should be all of them on this kind of thing.
So it's sector specific or?
Well, it depends. If there are better and worse companies in the sector, then you might distinguish between them. But to the extent it's a sectoral problem, you would do the sector. In fact, that's one of the advantages of doing it at the intermediary level. That's precisely that. Yes.
I also found this, I love it. My implementation questions that come to mind include, I mean, if this isn't required by government regulation, then mutual funds are going to offer these as options, and they will also still have options that are the basic passive investment. So I guess I'm wondering what you think would happen in terms of people as individual investors sorting into these things and then how that would shape the voting. I guess my other implementation question is just that, I mean, the impact investing community just here in New York City is like pretty huge. And those people think that's super complicated to deal with all these proposals. So maybe it's more, I'm sure you've thought about that one. I'm more curious about the first one, like the sorting and.
Yes. No, that's a very good point. So, I mean, I think what you're asking, among other things, is who would have an incentive to implement this, and what would be the effect? So, I mean, we're not really thinking of regulation here. We're thinking of this as something that people can do themselves, private ordering, or whatever you want to call it. So, we've been trying to persuade Vanguard and the like to get interested in something like this. So far, it's not been easy. We are talking to them, but I don't think they are wild about the idea. But they do, I mean, the one thing in our favor is that the big three get attacked for having too much power, right? Because collectively, they own about 25% of all American companies that are publicly traded, right? And the S&P 500 in particular. And that's a lot of power, right? And so, they're not the beneficiaries. They're not beneficial owners. So they're doing it on behalf of somebody else. And they're accused by the right of being too woke. And that's why they've sort of retreated from that kind of thing. But the left thinks they should be broken up, or maybe the right as well. So that's why they introduced pass-through voting. Pass-through voting is where they say, that was my missing slide, where they say, through us, you own one Exxon share. And so you can have that vote and do it yourself. Now, because anyone in the S&P 500 fund, actually, I tried to do this myself, which is you could do your own voting. Of course, what happens in proxy season is that all the proxy statements come in and you think, I'm not going to spend all my time doing this. I want to speak to my wife once in a while or watch television. So I gave up. But okay, there is a way around that, which is they offer you a way to delegate your vote. So you can say, I want this entity to vote on my behalf, but the trouble is they offer very boring choices so far. Anyway, that's how do we get? So they've started. They're relinquishing some of their power in this way, but the take-up rate hasn't been very great. So arguably, they could go a step further and have one of these investor assemblies. Now, what if they can be persuaded to do it? And as I say, in the UK. And in Europe, generally, there seems to be more willingness to try something like this. But what would it mean for investors? Yes, would Vanguard have an S&P 500 fund where we have an investor assembly and then we have another fund where we don't? Possibly. And then people could sort. The question is, who would... it's an interesting question, whether... The typical shareholder would say, I'm very happy with Vanguard. I'm just a maximized financial return person. I don't want anything else. And they could also, of course, opt out. So they could be in the same fund and just opt out and have some sort of other thing for them. They could delegate to Vanguard. I think there are mixed possibilities. But anyway, to be seen. Yes.
So this is really interesting. And I guess two questions. The first is sort of technical, but my general impression is that it's actually really hard to get shareholder resolutions accepted for various kind of technical reasons. I'm curious as to what you think about that. But if Vanguard has an assembly and the assembly votes to support shareholder resolutions with realistic chances of success that could seriously impair Exxon's ability to do stuff which is unethical but may increase the share price. Wouldn't whoever is investing for Vanguard immediately after voting the shares as required then sell off Exxon shares because their job still is to maximize shareholder value?
So is that a problem?
Sorry, who would sell them off?
The fund.
The fund? Oh, they're not, it's an index fund. They can't.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this is just the index fund.
It doesn't have to be, but remember, if they, in an efficient market, the share price should already have fallen.
So
there's no point. Yeah.
So second question, and let me channel Milton Friedman, which isn't ordinarily what I would do, but just for the sake of discussion. If I'm committed to these social goals, I can invest in B Corps or benefit corporations, there are green funds that I can invest in and so on. So even though I may tell a survey person that I'll give up some money to for environmental goals, if I really meant that, wouldn't I be putting my investment dollars into a fund that actually is doing that rather than staying with the Vanguard fund?
I would say not. That's not a good idea because it's for what I would, basically you're getting out of questionable companies. You're only investing in nice companies. Is that right? Why are you having an impact that way? Because who are the people who are then investing in the nasty companies? They're people worse than you who are going to push Exxon to drill even more, lobby even more. So that if you actually want to have an impact, you're better off using your votes. I think, does that make sense?
I can see that argument. I can also see something that supporting companies that are pursuing goals that I consider socially beneficial would be another way of having a positive influence.
There's no reason why, if you want, it's like, sure, I wouldn't say to somebody, don't support certain companies, particularly some, it could be a company that's not publicly traded or something that comes to you and, you become an impact investor or something like that. That's, I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but I'm saying that you don't want to just be doing that because partly you want to be holding index funds because that's just a smart investment strategy. And, if you just invested in really nice companies, you would have a very narrow portfolio. That's what I was saying. You might end up in bonds, and that's just not a good strategy. So it's better to, as I say, to feel the way you feel good is by making these companies better. And I mean, Friedman's argument was more that you could, you said you wanted to channel him. I think his argument was that instead of the company you're invested in doing good, they give you money and you do good yourself. But the thing is, the harm they're doing could far exceed any good you can do with the money they're handing to you. So it'd be better for you to tell them to stop doing the harm. And I think that's very clear in a lot of cases, and that's what this is about. Yeah. So we'll go.
Can you explain how this connects to entire sectors, like university endowments avoiding arms and cigarettes?
Sorry, say that again.
Like university endowments avoiding investing in arms and cigarettes. How does that logic avoid an entire sector? How does that compare to not avoiding bad companies?
So sorry, the university.
You're saying don't get out of investing in bad companies.
Yes, I'm saying don't do that.
Right.
And you're saying universities do, or they don't? Yeah. They're being pushed by students to do that.
Right. So universities have gotten out of arms and cigarettes. You're saying it's an investment mistake in some sense?
Yes, I think students, for some reason are very gung-ho on that strategy, but I don't think it makes sense. If you're being a consequentialist, if you want to feel good, you get out of the sector. Although, by the way, even that is very questionable because, suppose you inherit. We have an example in our book, forthcoming. Somebody inherits stocks from her grandfather, and some of them are tobacco stocks, okay? And she thinks, I can't hold tobacco stocks, so I'm going to sell them. And then she feels better. But one thing is, she's selling them at a high price. Somebody is willing to pay. So actually, she's benefiting from what is, she thinks has a clean conscience, but she doesn't really, in a way. She's benefiting from the high price she gets from selling. So a better strategy actually would be to get these tobacco companies to stay with them and support, and particularly once you had an investor assembly, something that's, stop them selling cigarettes to children in other countries where there is poor regulation. That would be actually much better. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of the trade-off to voting to do something pro-social for Exxon. You should get some kind of pro-social benefit, and there's some cost in terms of the business impact. And pro-social benefit, I see as having two parts. There's an intrinsic element, which is you feel good about doing something pro-social. It's consistent with your values, as you say in the paper. And I think there's also an extrinsic element that you're doing something virtuous. People appreciate others that do something pro-social. And it seems to me that in this assembly, the representative would still only pay 1/1,000,000th of the cost if they got 1/1,000,000th of the shares. And I think that in terms of the intrinsic element, it would be the same as if they were voting for themselves and get the same feeling about Exxon doing something pro-social. But I wonder if they would not get 1/50th of the virtue credit. Right, so it's not the voters of the S&P 500 that have done this. It's these 50 people. So wouldn't the virtue go to them, and which would shift them to be more pro-social than the set of investors would be?
That's an interesting point. I don't necessarily disagree with that, except I'm not sure, would they not feel virtue from being part of this assembly, not necessarily choosing a social they might decide the right thing to do is to maximize profit in this case, but they would still feel good because they've been part of the process. It seems to me that's arguable. So that I agree with you that the virtue will be bigger for them, but I'm not sure it's going to push them in a particular.
Are they going to be anonymous? Are they anonymous?
Around the assembly.
Oh, yes. I think the idea. That's a design choice, but I think it's good. Yes, they're known to each other, but not to outsiders. Yeah.
So I started off with one question, and now I have three because of the way in which the conversation has gone. So I chaired the Stanford Committee on Investments, and got lots of pressure from students, of course, to divest. And we did divest on one issue, coal. And it had consequences, not the kind you're talking about, not direct economic consequences. It clearly didn't really affect the bottom line of the company or frankly of Stanford. But what it did do was be part of a movement that sent out a signal about coal and about the ways in which people feel about coal, and the kind of complexity of that as a climate problem. So I think it can, under certain circumstances, have the kinds of consequences you want when you divest, but it's very rare. So
yes,
yes.
I think I'll just respond to that. That's an interesting case. I should say that, there's a well-known paper in finance that looked at the effect of divesting from South Africa on the share prices of South African companies or companies that were doing business in South Africa, found no effect at all. But of course, that was part of a much bigger thing that happened, and eventually it did have an effect. So, yeah.
So there are these other effects.
Yes.
The second thing that I hadn't thought about till we started talking about it was the legal requirement to improve. That's part of what Friedman achieved, was to make it part of the law, right? For companies.
Yeah.
And it's not true in some other countries. So that's part of what explains some of the national variation. you can sort of do this probably in the Netherlands. It'd be very hard to do it, be much harder to do it in the States because of the law that you have to actually make sure that money is the only thing.
How does that connect?
Can I comment on that? Can I comment? I think.
Sure, but I do want to make my third point too, but go ahead.
Okay, I think that's slightly, you're right in spirit, but not in detail, because there is no law like that.
Right.
There isn't a
People
law.
believe it.
It's a custom that has developed, and I don't. If you ask lawyers, I don't think they'll say, "Oh, it's because of Milton Friedman." It was happening anyway, but it may have been helped a bit by him. But the thing is, it's the way, let's say, the Delaware courts interpret fiduciary duty. Duty of loyalty. They say company boards have a duty of loyalty to their shareholders. What does that mean? It means maximizing financial return. Now, the thing is, I think that is ridiculous, because if the shareholders want something else, how are you being loyal to them by doing something they don't want? But I can tell you that trying to convince a Delaware judge of that is not easy.
Or a corporation.
Or a corporation there, and all the people who have been brought up under this system, including having been trained at Harvard Business School to think this is right, but not even just many. It's the dominant view, and so it takes a lot of work ahead of us to try to undo. But I don't think it's based on anything really solid.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, the third point, which is really what I was going to make earlier, was sort of stimulated, thinking about what are the incentives to create an assembly and how would you do that? And the Dutch case is interesting because it was a pension fund.
Yes.
And I think that might be the way in.
Yes.
You try, the labor unions and groups that have pensions might be much more open to this than Vanguard or a mutual fund that's set up simply to optimize, fiscal value to the shareholder.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. We have discovered this ourselves, but it took us a long time because we were but several people have told us, that might be the best bet.
And once it gets going, sometimes these things get taken up by others.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I agree.
I was going to add, your point is quite good, well taken, and I had been thinking along parallel lines that you have pension funds like CalPERS, California Pension Fund, which is huge.
Yes.
And you also have the global acceptance of the idea of corporate social responsibility, and that is taught through business schools. And EMBA programs. And so they have the idea of corporate social responsibility in China, for example, which they take very seriously. And it's an idea that diffused through so many business schools teaching EMBA programs and MBA programs in China. So there's a global view that there is such a thing as corporate social responsibility, and you have national wealth funds, you have pension funds that are enormous. The Canadian pension fund is an enormous one, and CalPERS is extraordinarily large. And can these also provide a mechanism through which citizens can influence the corporate policy through the back door of corporate social responsibility and through the pension funds, which we represent people who are working and have an interest?
Well, I think two things to that. First of all, when people talk about corporate social responsibility, it's often win-win stuff. It's doing well by doing good, right? It's all, you treat your workers well, and that's going to increase your profits in the long run. And it's all very nice, but it's the low-hanging fruit. No trade-offs allowed. I've talked to these people a lot, and they just won't acknowledge that it could ever be the case that you might do something which is socially responsible, but is bad for the long run profitability of the company. They can't accept it. But I think that's wrong. In fact, lots of evidence that, yes, maybe treating your workers badly will come back to haunt you, or treating your customers badly will come back to haunt you. But treating the environment badly, no, that's not going to come back. The thing about the pension funds, I think it's continuing what Margaret was saying, but I think the CalPERS is a defined benefit pension fund. So I think we're on our strongest ground so they could say, the people who are on the hook are actually the California voters, so they could have an assembly of them. That would make sense, but not necessarily the pension recipients. Whereas with the defined contribution funds, that's where the pensioners are on the hook, and that they should have the voting power. Yeah.
Just clarification questions.
Yes.
On the voting mechanism.
Yeah.
Number one, is this a secret ballot? And number two, is
in the assembly?
Yeah, in the assembly.
No.
Everyone has a secret ballot.
It's a good question. I should ask Elaine. I don't get the impression. Maybe it is, but I mean, the whole idea is people are talking to each other. So it's not exactly, I'm not sure I should ask her. I don't think that's the idea, because it's a deliberation. So at the end of it, it's more like a vote of authority.
This is not a secret ballot. Then the vote will actually, carries not just one's own preference, but, the social environment and the socialization.
Well, the idea is that we're going to learn from each other. I come in with a strong view that, antibiotics, who cares about that or something, and then you have the opposite view and we talk about it. Or as happened, go back to the Irish Assembly on abortion, which has been documented. There were people... or same-sex marriage. Elaine has described how, somebody who basically thought he hated gay people and actually ended up becoming best friends with a gay member of the assembly. In other words, talking to each other, I think this is one of the things which is a theme of today, communication. It can, we exchange views. Our views somewhat converge, not maybe completely, but so that's an important part of this.
Right. But I guess there are 2 plus 1. I think communication is important, right? So that everyone can share facts and, even the informational thing. But at the same time, there might still be a difference when it comes to expressing their own preference, either anonymously or, publicly. I think that could be something to think about. The second point of detail is about, so is there a particular consideration between issue voting, which seems to be what you are suggesting, and voting for the board, right? So,
yes,
for example, the board could have some message about what I want to do, and then you can look at those, message and see whether you want to vote for something like this.
Yeah. That's a very good question. So I think that would make it more. So first of all, you have to remember that board elections are basically almost never contested. So it's not like a political election where you have. Now you could imagine a world where you had board members who say, "I'm for less lobbying on this and more lobbying on that," and somebody says the opposite. You could imagine that, but I think. We like the idea of not, it's like, as I said, Elaine's book is called Politics Without Politicians. And I think one of the reasons she's so into citizens' assemblies is because once you have people being elected, they will, they also get corrupted. And they're trying to have a career and all this sort of stuff, which the assembly avoids, because these people will be there for 1 year, and then the next year there'll be a different assembly. So there'll be no careerist things going on.
Right.
And because their identities are not known, it's not the case that some oil company can try to target them. So I think I would be against just saying we're going to make it like competing boards.
But what I meant is that citizen assembly is voting for the company's management board, right? So the company's management, right? The CEO, the chairman of the
No, that's what the board does.
right. But then they will put out a statement that I stand for this. I will protect the environment, and then the citizen assembly, others, and or Vanguard can cast a vote for or against the chairman of the board or the company's board, right?
Well,
because
I think, okay, we can continue the discussion. Let me just say, I'm comfortable with the idea that the board should consist more of experts on how to run a good company, not about the social things, the trade-offs, not about that. That should be the job of the shareholders. And then the board can actually are the kind of experts to actually execute it. So I don't want to combine the two things. But we can talk about it more. Thank you. So I think,
okay.